This isn't a video about how the beta worked, because of course it had problems. Instead, this'll be a video about how the Battlefield 1 felt compared to Battlefields 3 and 4 and Bad Company 2. After a week's worth of battles, I've reached a few conclusions and made them into 5 quick points about the game. Hopefully, I'll be able to help you reach your decision if you should try the game, or shift your focus on other big games released in the last quarter of 2016. This is perhaps the most important thing the players will get from the open beta. The Emperor has new clothes, and that you can very clearly see the nasty bits. It's a Battlefield game, alright, in the good and in the bad. You will run a lot and you will die a lot, especially if you're new to the Battlefield franchise, so you'll need some patience, as it can also feel overwhelming how much there is for you to do. After you familiarized yourself with the game, and found a group of people who enjoy playing the objective, and maybe discovered the equipment you're most comfortable to enter the battlefield with, you're all set. Though this might sound off-putting to some, what's appealing to many is that you don't have to be the world's greatest shot to help your team, or generally to have fun, as there's quite a bit of stuff you can do in the battlefield. You kinda have to work yourself into the game, but fortunately it's learning made fun. If you're more of a Call of Duty player, I might have something for you in the next point I've made about the game. Generally though, the Battlefield experience is quite a bit different from your standard shooters, being that everything seems more alive, as you can pop into most vehicles you come across and hide in any building until it's blown away. Having good reflexes certainly helps, but it's not as vital as it is in some other shooters. In Battlefield, you'll have to start thinking about how to approach every situation and how to use your surroundings in your advantage if you're met with resistance. So the Emperor has new clothes, but you have to remember that essentially it's the very same Emperor. Emperor that you either love or hate. While the Battlefield series has always been about destruction, one of the good things that I took from the open beta was that there was a great deal more structures now that can't be destroyed. Some might claim that this isn't the Battlefield way, but I actually do believe it's for the better. This coming from someone who actually started to pay attention to the Battlefield series because of the destruction I experienced in Bad Company 2. I do remember how much fun I had hugging my knees in a building falling apart at all seams, as I was being hunted by 100 tanks, 1,000 planes and 1,000,000 of grenades, plus 1 John Matrix. In the later games, it's been sort of silly how the shape of the warfare changes when all the buildings are mowed down. At some point, I began noticing that I wasn't having fun anymore, as there were basically only 2 ways you could actually play the game, in a vehicle or through a sniping scope. To me, the Battlefield series has always been about going forward and having fun with whatever crosses your path. And that's the meat of it, since 1 minute you're a pilot and the next you're an army trying to escape the crosshairs of planes. One of the reasons I like the indestructible structures is that as folks seem to have an unnatural tryst with the sniper class, and as a regular foot soldier, I now had shelter that allowed me to focus on playing the game, the objective, instead of going into paranoia about sniper scope glints in the horizon. I do appreciate the art of sniping when it's done properly, but I've sort of fed up with players who always choose the sniper class and suck from game to game. I might not be able to do farts worth with a sniper rifle, but at least I'm intensively playing the objective. In the beginning of the open beta, the players were extremely vocal about the overpower of the tanks. A player in a tank could do something like 50 kills without dying himself. While it might be somewhat realistic, it's not fun for the lot doing the dying. The complaints have since quieted down slightly, as people have leveled up and have access to personal gear to deal with the tanks. The tanks are still super tough. These stages do have stationary weapons to deal with the armored vehicles too, but I almost never saw them in use, because it would most likely mean sure death for the operator too. If not by the tank, then almost certainly buy something else, as you have to take aim and reload after each shot. You can't stop in the open in Battlefield games and take aim with a huge contraption and expect to live to tell the tale. The designers have to rethink the matter, as there has to be an efficient way to stop the tanks that doesn't involve you dying in a degree of certainty. One other thing that I had to deal with almost all the time was the game's zeal to move me involuntarily, as I was prone, or getting into position, or trying to get down when fired upon. If the terrain wasn't perfectly flat, or clear of rubble, the game had the habit of sliding my character on the ground, or even making me stand up all of a sudden, and that's not good. Another constant gripe of mine has to do with the terrain in the game too. Quite often, I couldn't seem to be able to get over obstacles, and funnily enough, the lower the obstacle, the harder time I seem to have. It's not a great feeling as you're retreating from a tank and you can't get over something that's half a foot high. It stops your movement completely and you just hump the air as you're smashing the jumping button to no avail. And much sooner than later, you're put out of your misery. The reason I decided to underline the matters with the terrain is that I've bumped into these in the previous Battlefield games too, but in the Battlefield 1, the worry about the terrain is a constant bother. There is a high chance that diving into cover doesn't actually work and your character stands up, and that you can't vault over something that wouldn't even stop a baby. These things simply have to be taken care of in the release, because as is, it's a game breaker for me. The absolutely worst thing about the beta is the stages. Beyond the realization that there are more indestructible structures, there's been a great deal of alarm about the two stages we were given access to. Both are set in the Sinai Desert, but unfortunately, both are, in a word, boring. The stages and the two game modes, Conquest and Rush, do allow us to get acquainted with their vision, but the maps don't really deliver. And the reason I'm underlining this here is that you can ask yourself, what makes an FPS? Is it the guns? Is it the graphics? Is it the online play? Well, yes. But also no. It's the maps, and especially how fun they are to play. In that regard, the Sinai Desert is a failure. I do honestly believe that these two maps will be left free to play. Indeed, this map feels cheap, and while it might not be the best piece to demonstrate the game with, it feels a lot better to me, as a player and a consumer, to consider this map as some sort of marketing freebie, rather than something I should pay for. Oh, don't get me wrong, I had great fun playing the beta, it's just that it wasn't because of the maps. If I wouldn't have had access to planes, cars, tanks, horses and such, I could have sworn I was playing something else than a Battlefield game. They either have to amp up the map, or showcase other maps that leave impressions like the better maps of Battlefields 3 and 4. Ask anyone who's played the game more than 10 hours, the reasons are anything but the maps. A rather alarming issue has just popped up. The internet's found footage where people playing the game were experiencing different weather in the game. Yeah, that doesn't sound too alarming in itself, but the thing is, if the sandstorm hits, your visibility is cut drastically, you simply don't see well, and if this piece of footage is genuine, it gives a huge advantage to players whose vision is not hampered by the weather effects. I'm rather doubtful about this thing and it could turn out as a hoax, but if these things turn out to be true, simply put, I'm going to skip the game and not look back. Battlefield 1 is obviously an investment for DICE and EA, and it's understandable that they didn't change the winning formula that much. Rather, they focused on how to introduce the game to the world, and in that, they succeeded rather well. Instead of focusing on modern-day aspects of warfare and borderlining the futuristic, Battlefield 1 whisked us back in time, somewhat. They showed a vision influenced by the First World War. The timing was great too, as a lot of players seem to be bored with the shooter set in our current era. Battlefield 1 has a flair of new air about it, and anyone rushing to release a similar game is almost certainly seen as copying them. Battlefield 1 is first and foremost a Battlefield game, and as such, it's always an occasion. We'll learn in a few months' time if they're addressing the issues that the beta players had. If they don't hold your breath as they try to sort things out after the game is released. Their track record for such things is rather awful. I'm definitely interested, but not rushing to give them my monies. The end of 2016 is filled with great games, and DICE has to do something to win me over.